Incognegro Renaissance tells the story of a young, fair-skinned black journalist seeking to uncover details behind the death of a man named Xavier in Harlem, New York. It picks up at a book release party for Nigger Town by Arnold Van Horn, where our protagonist and his friend encounter an enthusiastic black man who purports that he is a close colleague to the book's author, has his own book on the way, and ends up dead with the manuscript on his floating body in an upstairs bathroom. What unfolds from here is a murder mystery in which Zane, our protagonist, confronts blaxploitation in the midst of one of the most notably prominent times for black people. In order to get into the famous but segregated Cotton Club, Zane finds himself reluctantly passing as a white man in order to follow a lead on the case. His friend Carl calls this going incognegro. Eventually, he comes across a white-passing actress who happens to be Xavier's cousin. One day, as they were tracking the case, she received mail threatening to expose her identity as a black woman. This would prevent many obstacles in her pursuit to acting stardom. In order to avoid this, however, she must meet at a restaurant where black people aren't allowed, prompting Zane to go incognegro once again to provide her backup in this dire situation. She is confronted by the publisher of the book and discovers that the book was actually written by her cousin Xavier, the man who was found dead, and that Van Horn, the man who was given credit, gave the manuscript to his publisher as his own. The publisher preferred to release the work with Van Horn's name because Xavier was a Negro. After a swift escape, they confront Van Horn at a book signing, and he tells all. He used Xavier to get the book, promising that he would get his next work published. Xavier was at the party that night to expose what had happened by showing that he had the original manuscript before the book was released. This is what prompted them to have him killed. Eventually, the publisher is convicted and sentenced for his crimes. Van Horn's fate is never discussed because it was never important, and Bet is introduced on Broadway as the tragic mulatto, after capitalizing on the publicity of the expose that Zane wrote, which has now brought his journalistic career to prominence. As I said at the beginning, this was a story about blaxploitation, and it was also about the coexisting importance and irrelevance of racial differences in American history and society. As was explained in the book, black people migrated from the South to escape the obstacles and the violence that was presented to them by white Americans. In this story, they end up in Harlem. One of the many themes of the book is that Harlem is a place that black people created for themselves within a white world, which is why the inclusion of segregation via the Cotton Club is so significant. It reminds us the world they still lived in, even though history may not remember the limitations still present during the age of the new Negro. Zane, using his light skin as a weapon against this, serves as a reminder of the resistance that Harlem represented, and the resistance that Harlem needed to even exist. This outlining a story in which a white man was repeatedly praised for observations on a black world clearly makes this a blaxploitation piece. Van Horn took the manuscript from Xavier and published it under his own name. The book was called Inward Town, which would be crazy if it was released by a white man today. The book also was purported to be a brand new look at the workings of a Negro in a Negro society. Or as Van Horn called it, I'm not going to say the name of that book again. Whole time, this book was written by a black man who actually had the talent to write something that a publisher believed in. And for context, this man's grandfather probably couldn't even read. Yet, within this land that black people created, that is infiltrated by the world they were trying to depart, a black man created art by and for his people. And this art was stolen to advance the career and line the pockets of the very people who the niggers made this town to escape. Poorly executed pun aside, this graphic novel does a great job of representing black Americans in this fractured landscape because it depicts how they grapple with these realities and make their own individual decisions that not all people, including black people, agree with. This is a far cry from the depictions that black Americans used to receive around the time that this story was set in. At that time, we would be depicted as pickaninnies, less than human, unintelligent, and violent. In this story, we get to see more variety and insight from black characters in ways that directly confront their sometimes tragic history, illuminate the positivity found within it still, and establish nuance within and between the characters' perspectives.